fulfillment. So we are moving on to the next part of this day, and it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Carrie Arnold, who is, for me, a Georgetown sister. We both trained in the same leadership coaching program. And she is now a coach, an author, and a consultant specializing in healthcare, human resources, and education. Carrie has had extensive experience consulting in the Denver public schools. She lives in Denver with her husband and dog Moose, whom she says loves her more than anyone in the world. Carrie is the author of a fabulous 2020 book called Silenced and Sidelined, about how women leaders lose and find their voices and what we can all do about this. Carrie says she didn't just come to her research from an academic lens, but from her own experiences as a coach, hearing proud, brilliant, confident women whose voices in coaching sessions would be so clear and grounded, and then when out in the room, metaphorically, with other leaders, would lose their voices. Carrie wanted to know why and to understand more. She also says the work came from examining her own experiences. Where do I have voice? Where don't I? And why? So she says she did the research and wrote the book to change the conversation. Silence, she says, is a kind of psychological violence to the person who desires to speak. One of her research subjects also observed that in essence, being silenced is a little bit like being poisoned every day. Carrie says this book and her presentation are about voice recovery for women. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Carrie Arnold, and remember to put your questions in the chat and get ready to bring them forward. We're asking you not to lose your voice in the question and answer. So thank you, Carrie.
Well, thank you. Can you guys hear me okay? All right. I've done this presentation so many times over the last several years, and I feel almost like wanting to say something completely different today, sitting through Dr. Tina's presentation and just being with this amazing group. I feel very honored to be here. Yesterday, when I did my tech rehearsal, I have naturally curly, frizzy hair, and I wore it natural yesterday. And when I woke up this morning, I wanted to be professional, so I straightened it. I wanted to wear color, but I didn't want to wear too much, so I put on this little black thing. And then I was wondering about if my earrings were too dangly, and I was just like, oh my goodness, the things we wake up as women thinking about. I would love for you to write that question down. What do I wake up thinking about every morning? Now, we think of our schedules, obviously, and what we have to do, but once we get all that logistical stuff away, what do we think about? We probably think about the shell of a human body that we live in. Our souls inhabit these bodies. We have hair, we have skin, we have weight, we have fat in certain places, we have vocal cords. We have a respiratory system, we have, what did we eat the night before that's going to mess with us today? These are all the things that we think about. And then we think about our family members. If we have children, we think about the color of their skin. We think about their health issues. We think about the scenarios they might be presented with. Oftentimes privilege is what you don't have to think about. But as women and men too, we all do, we wake up thinking about our bodies. And I've been waking up for many mornings thinking about voice and silencing. And so it's a pleasure to be here today. I do have a deck. I'm not going to show you every single slide because I don't want this to be an academic presentation, but I do want to just throw out some concepts, as Kirsten said, to potentially change the conversation around how we view voice and how we view silence, and specifically how we view silencing, which is very different. So part of what I'll talk about today are those distinctions. And I'll put up a slide to get us started. And I am recovering from COVID, so you're going to hear me coughing a few times, and I might even mute myself as I'm coughing, which is what I'm about to do right. All right, so let me just put my first slide up here. Let me share. I think, you know, we're all living in troubled times. My research was before the pandemic came out. My book came out during 2020, but it had already been written. And so I was thinking, gosh, our times are pretty troubled even before we moved into this era we're in right now. But you know, the resources that I'm bringing to you today, as Kirsten said, I wrote a book, and it was to change the conversation, but also to honor the women who participated in my research. I did a lot of postdoc research, did a lot of interviews, transcribed a lot of stories, and I wanted to give voice to the experience they shared. My company is called the Willow Group, and I also run the coach training program at Fielding Graduate University. So all of this pulls into what I'm going to share with you today. And again, these are learning objectives are really high. I want to talk about the phenomenon of feeling silenced and what does that really look like for us as human beings, specifically women, and how are we making sense of silencing in systems, silencing in relationships, and then how are we self-silencing? And how are we reframing this conversation in a larger container to talk about the social justice need behind having voice? And you'll hear me say voice with currency, which is you hear me. I have a voice that carries in the organization I'm working or in the communities I'm serving. People hear me, people follow me, people maybe repeat some of my messages. A voice with currency is what many think is the new currency in organizations, which is being heard, having influence. But I guarantee you, I used to be pretty conservative with these percentages, but I'm going to be a little bit less conservative and say about 80 to 90% of you are sitting here listening to me and you are feeling silenced in some aspect of your life. You may be feeling silenced in your leadership role, in your instructional role, in your professional role. Maybe you're feeling silenced as a partner, as a spouse, maybe feeling silenced within community groups. Some of you, it's just a little corner of your world. And for others, it is a huge rush that's impacting every area of your life. And there are some healing moves that we can talk about if you're finding yourself in that more broad brush category. But first, let me just say that silence, not the spoken word, is truly the only phenomenon that is always at our disposal. We always get to choose silence. I may not be able to get to choose when I'm speaking or how I'm heard, but I can be very careful with my silences. And as women, our silences can be very misinterpreted. So there's the silence that connects us, where we're just with each other. And I'm shoulder to shoulder in sisterhood or brotherhood with my other human beings, and we're in sync. Nothing needs to be said because we're connected. And we love that feeling. There's no words. It's just sort of outside of ourselves. And there's that silence that separates. You know, we don't make eye contact. We have our no faces on. We have this sort of bubble around us that says stay, you know, not just 6 feet apart because of COVID, but forever, because I don't want to connect with you. All of this is silence. No words are being expressed in these scenarios. And then there's the silence that just darn right confuses us. And look at all those gray suits. I will never look at this slide the same way again, where we can't make sense of why things aren't being said. We can't figure out the temperature in the room. We can't figure out how to integrate into what's happening. There's an atmosphere, there's a temperature, and it's confusing. We have to be careful of how our silences are communicating confusion. Am I saying what needs to be said? Am I not? And why? So those are all different. There's actually 40 plus definitions of silence and the meaning it carries. All of those, though, are different than feeling silenced. And so when I'm talking about feeling silenced, I have expression, I have ideas, I have contributions. I want to add to this conversation, but I feel suppressed. I feel muted. I feel oppressed. I feel like my voice is not welcomed in the room. And there is a physical manifestation that happens in a body that needs to express, who's not able to express. And that's the conversation I think we're not having. So feeling silenced is so different than those other forms of silence. Some of the key definitions include, again, the sense of being muffled. A nature of a human can shift when they feel silenced for too long. In academic terms, we talk about ontological ways of being. Ontology is my way of being in the world. When we feel silenced too long in egregious ways, we show up as a different human being. I go back to some of the stuff Dr. Tina was talking about is we lose our sense of authenticity. We lose that inner genuineness. We forget who we are. I can't tell you how many women in leadership I've spoken to who will say, how did I get here? I used to be so different. And so silencing can start to change the way we just even manifest in the world. Voice. If you put your hand on your throat and just hum a little, you'll feel a vibration. We have this ability as human beings to actually utter sounds and expressions. I have a very animated dog named Moose who may join us, but we can form expressions and communicate with words. And so what is the nature of this area of your body right now? Have you ever just stopped to think about your trachea, your vocal cords? If any of you are carrying any sort of, virus right now, maybe that is on your mind, but how often are you reflecting on the quality of this part of your neck and your body? Purposeful voice is I am motivated to express with purpose. I have an information topic to share. I have an opinion. I have a decision to announce. I'm intentional. I'm resolute. I have agency. I'm not just sharing stuff, talking stories, hopping all over them from topic to topic, but I'm purposeful. How purposeful are you in your use of voice? And then voice efficacy, which is kind of a funky little wordplay there, is a repeated pattern of purposeful voice. So just be reflecting on this as I talk, is how purposeful are we right now and what we speak about? How purposeful are we in our utterances? There's Moose, he just joined us. He's gonna lay down on his bed beside me. But we have this tendency at times to have a pattern in our speaking. And it's not just communication, it's voice. And so those are some things to be reflecting on, is what is the quality of your voice and why do we even bother? Why even bother talking about this? This presentation this morning was so powerful. She talked a little bit about statistics. I saw the break slides on statistics. The statistics of women in leadership are very grim right now. More women are educated than men, and this has been true since 1982. More women get bachelor's degrees. More women get master's degrees. There's more women getting doctoral degrees. More women go to law school. Now it's a tiny percent more. It's probably more like half and half. Half and half in medical school. We're highly educated human beings. And for the most part, we're 50% middle management. So when you look across the scope, many women are taking a seat in middle management, but that's when our statistics start to go down. Healthcare is 80% women, and yet only 11% of women run hospital systems. Despite all of our education, we're not tenured faculty as often as our male counterparts. When you look at Fortune 500 companies, sometimes our statistics aren't trending up, they start to trend down because as women retire in those senior level roles, they're not always replaced by women. So the statistics of women in leadership, high senior level leadership is low. You guys know this. It's actually interesting, though, to think about that we're highly educated, but we're highly underutilized. And why? Why is that true? And I want to change the conversation a little bit because I think our voice and our silencing is part of that. If there's so few of us in senior leadership roles, we need to make sure our voice is healthy in those roles. We need to make sure our voice is heard in those roles. We don't want to be in those roles as silenced women leaders. So in my opinion, it's a little bit of hyperbole, but maybe not. The most dangerous place to live and work is in a silenced state. And so let me just briefly talk about the ways in which we're silenced. If I was to ask you to just close your eyes and reflect on what is silencing you the most right now, it is possible a person's face is going to show up in your consciousness. It could be a woman, it could be a man, it could be a small group of people, but if there is a person that shows up, it suggests you're being silenced by a relationship. And I love speaking to groups of women. I also love speaking to groups of men because men are not always our silencers. Women are just as capable of silencing each other, and in some ways, we do it more fiercely. Sometimes we expect to be silenced by male dominant cultures, but when we are silenced by one of our own, one of my participants said it's scorched earth. It's really hard to replant seeds in that scorched earth when we do this to each other as women. So relationships can be silencers. A person in your world could be your silencer. But sometimes it's not that simple. Sometimes we think, if I got rid of all of those faces and names and people in my head and still thought of myself as a leader, an educator, a professional, I might still feel this same way. And then we're talking about a system that silences us, because systems, the student example is so perfect, what she talked about this morning, this cultural norm that just keeps carrying forward, where we're not deconstructing the systems. Who gets voice? Who gets to speak? Who doesn't get to speak? And I use this slide often because this gentleman sitting in this chair right here is probably a lovely human being, but he may have this leadership style of, we don't skip. You don't skip, meaning if you want to have a conversation with any of these lovely people above me, you have to go through me. And so sometimes we work in systems that don't allow us to go have a conversation with a colleague who has a son on your soccer team, who plays sports with your own kiddo. Wouldn't it be so much easier just to go collaborate with that person real quickly on something? But you can't, because there's this cultural norm of how you navigate these different boxes and squares on a screen. I used to work for a company back 20 plus years ago who was a ride and die flow chart company. I mean, they would modify it almost every month. It was just part of the process, and dotted lines and squares, and that piece of paper held power. If you were in a certain square, you had a lot of influence and power. And you might have even been in a square above that one, but maybe not as much power. And so these flow charts and org charts that were created back in manufacturing times to help create products and do things in a seamless way have now become silencers. Because this is not how we live and breathe and work as knowledge workers. This is not how in modern day society we typically operate. We go outside of our lanes all the time to get work done. In fact, I would argue this is pretty much how work naturally gets done. It's a tangled mess. And if you're in this little red dot area and you're trying to communicate with a dot over here, how are we navigating systems? And so part of what we have to look at is deconstructing, why do we do things the way we do them here? How did we get to this spot? And if it's a system that's hard to navigate, it could be a system that's silencing you. And then the third way we're silenced is we self-silence. This is probably the most unhealthy, dangerous place to do or be as a human, is when we self-silence. And I love this little example here. Brandon saw 17 blue cars and 25 green cars. How many cars did he see? He got 42. I got the answer by talking in my brain, and I agreed with the answer my brain got. He heard an inner voice. He had this inner sense of wisdom, and he agreed with it. And somehow we get stripped of that inner voice as we progress as human beings in the world. You know, we may have a strong sense of voice early, and then we lose that as we vertically grow as adults into early career. And then we become part of groups and group think. And we become part of communities and cultures where we have to sort of strip part of ourselves to feel included. And then after a while, We get into senior leadership roles, and you're sitting across from someone like me who's asking you research questions about the quality of your voice and why you feel silenced, and you can't get to the bottom of it. In my research, I interviewed women between the ages of 40 and 60. Most were in senior level roles. Some were running hospitals, some were running districts, some were running nonprofits. Senior director on up was kind of the the demographic. And I also interviewed women from multiple industries and intersections all across the board. I chose that because I didn't necessarily want to be interviewing humans who were new in their careers, who were just still trying to find themselves. I wanted to interview women who felt silenced in ways that might surprise others. You know, what does it mean to be running an organization with so much power and influence, and yet say you feel like you have no options or choice? You feel stuck. You feel like you cannot be who you are intended to be. What a paradox. And so that self-silencing, and it could be system silencing, it could be relationship silencing, it could be all of it combined, but there's a self-silencing element. And Lord, she's this lovely poet. She says, if you don't speak it out one day, it'll just up and punch you in the mouth from the inside. I don't even need to explain that. I'll just let you sit with that comment. If you don't speak it out, it'll just up and punch you in the mouth from the inside. I've watched women get fired for this. I've watched women lose relationships for this. I've watched women do this and then suffer the consequences of it. Because we just hold it, we hold it, we hold it, and then out it comes. The relationship of language and silence to deprivation is profound. What happens when one needs to or should speak and is cut off from the possibility of speaking? What kind of deprivations does the silenced body experience? If we go back, just again, put your hand on your throat. What kind of deprivation is your body in right now because of a perception of feeling silenced? I'm not able to see the chat, but I'm going to stop my share for just a moment because I would love to just hear some comments. What does the silenced body experience? Pause here, see what's coming up here. I've waited until my thoughts have punched me in the mouth from the inside. Yeah. I often find I do speak, but not until I'm shouting. You know, that's what's interesting too, is that women who, and I apologize to the men in the group when I keep saying women, my research was on women. I have been told it's generalizable to the male gender, but I haven't done that research to verify it. So you'll hear me say women a lot. A woman who's silenced does not stay quiet. Sometimes when we feel silenced, we speak more. We speak louder, we speak faster, we repeat ourselves, we get circular because we're not feeling heard. Sometimes quiet women feel heard. And so that's the thing, that feeling silenced does not mean we are silent. It could mean we just keep trying to get our messages out in ways that the feedback is such that we're not heard. We're not heard. It's tense. It can feel like an identity crisis, hopeless, feels, there's dissonance, anxiety, depression, defeat. Feels like you can't breathe, waiting a lifetime to exhale. Oh, geez. Yes, absolutely. So many wonderful things in here to describe this hard phenomenon. And what's hard about this phenomenon is we're not talking about it. We're framing it in different ways. Imposter syndrome, lack of confidence, maybe it's a lack of authenticity, can't fit in, you know, all the things that sort of Dr. Tina was talking about this morning. We frame it in different ways to try to explain what is going on here. Why do I feel the way I feel? And we are not necessarily working in society that welcomes all voice. And that was talked about this morning too. We live in a society that is socially constructed, meaning we have roles and norms and guidelines of how we are supposed to be in the world, created by other human beings, not necessarily those of us who would like it to change. And some of it is human nature. Our biology, our DNA, and sometimes it's hard to separate out what's really going on here when we don't feel heard and when we feel silenced. And so I love this slide that I have used often in presentations. But human nature, social construct, like what is it that's happening here? If it is socially constructed, we can change it. We don't have to stay in a world that silences everybody, or that silences women. We don't have to stay in a world that silences, as Dr. Tina said, historically marginalized groups. And we know this to be true, that when we are too silenced or too silent, lives get lost. We've watched this over and over and over again. So how are we speaking in ways that can be heard? How are we speaking on topics that matter? And how are we doing it with a voice with currency? We have our tribes, we have our communities, we have our sisterhood, and we speak to people who have our same opinions and our same beliefs, and we feel so connected in that. But how are we speaking to other groups that don't always align with our thinking? What voice currency are we using? How purposeful are we in that? But for us to be able to find voice after we've lost it, we sort of need to look at the silencing virus. And again, I apologize for using this metaphor. I did this research before COVID came out, so you're going to see me referencing silencing as a virus. Not at all to equate it with COVID, but to just really demonstrate the pervasiveness it has in a human being. You lose your sense of agency when you feel silenced. You have deficit thinking. That deficit thinking is, I don't belong anymore. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. Someone else should do this. Someone else could do it better. You really begin to doubt your own competency. And then there's the cognitive spin, where we can't sleep at night because we keep replaying the same conversations in our head over and over and over. And our brain so desperately wants a different outcome, but there is not one yet. And so we keep rehearsing what already happened. And that cognitive spin keeps us really cognitively stuck. So from the clavicle up, when we feel silence, what's going on in our head space is taking up a lot of residency, keeping us from tapping into our creative leadership. When I talked to women who've gone through this, they talked about the trauma that they felt. Some described silencing as post-traumatic stress disorder, a sense of vulnerability, not the good kind, where we need to be vulnerable to learn, but the vulnerability that made them feel like they needed to armor up, to wear my suit, to straighten my hair, to not do anything that would put me as not fitting, so to speak. So that vulnerability of feeling truly like they could be psychologically harmed. And then there's so few of us in leadership to begin with. Imagine feeling silenced in leadership and the more pervasive isolation you might experience. And then there's that loss of self. Who am I? How did I get here? What has become of me when I can't speak my mind or speak my thoughts, my emotions? But then there's the physical ramifications too, where women talked about diagnoses, chipped teeth, grinding teeth, locked jaw, migraines, respiratory problems, digestive issues, significant weight gain, significant weight loss, stress in shoulders. One woman's stomach tore and she had to have surgery. One woman almost died, and she equated it back to when she was working for a company feeling incredibly silenced. So I think sometimes we just associate our stress in the body as growing old, or as just general, stuff that we all have to deal with. But sometimes when we are dealing with something socially at work, we might need to be better at correlating that with the symptoms in our bodies. How could all of this be going on cognitively, emotionally, holding it in our body, and us still be great leaders? How is that even possible? How do we show up as these amazing women in leadership with full voice if we're feeling all of this? We can't, which is why we need to change the conversation about how we heal from feeling silenced. So some of you might be thinking, what does she mean? What silences us? I talked about the three ways: the systems, the relationships, and the self-silencing. But let me give you a few examples of what I heard in my research. Um, One woman who worked as a high-level executive, and she had to help her organization go through a restructure. She had to help them decide who was going to stay and who was going to go. Anybody who's ever gone through that knows you just can't win. So she went through the process. Some people lost their jobs. One day she went into the bathroom and someone had scrawled her name across the bathroom wall and said some horrible things about her. And there was just something about that situation that just crushed her spirit so fully. Even 5-10 years later, when she was talking to me, she still could not quite say she had ever gotten over that experience of seeing herself branded in such a negative way. I saw another example of like a one-time thing where a woman talked about how she was working for a large company. She had a marketing background. She was sitting at an operational table with lots of operational leaders who'd grown up operationally, but she was a marketing professional. Now she's sitting at this table. And one of them said, "It's clear you're not operational based on what you're saying." She didn't have the right words. She couldn't say the right things to look smart at that table. That was the last time she held a senior level role. And when I interviewed her 20 years later, I asked her how long it took for her to get over being told that. She says, "Carrie, I don't think I'm over it yet." Like, that silenced me, it pivoted me in my career. It gave me such a complex that I couldn't quite get over it. So sometimes life happens and one thing just stands out. Someone probably very unintentionally said something or did something, and we're so porous and it soaked right into us and it became part of us and we couldn't let it go. And then it kind of silenced our voice and silenced our potential. So there's that extreme. And then there's just the micro aggressive things that might happen to us over and over and over. The eye rolls, someone taking our idea, maybe being put down, being disinvited to something, having a leader that just kind of keeps you in your place, doesn't let you bloom. Like those, you can't quite say it's that or this or this or that, but it just feels like this accumulation. And that accumulation can build up until we begin to feel so silenced and we just can't even remember where it started or where it will ever stop. And so what we do as women, we quit, go find another job. And I'll leave this and I'll start over fresh. And we all know where you go, there you are. You're starting a new job as a silenced woman. And so when I looked at the recovery period of women who had truly recovered and refound their voice, it was about a 2-year period, which suggests we got to move through that a little faster. And we got to move through that in community because you can't get over a silencing experience necessarily all by yourself. So let me give you some statistics, and I'm not going to throw up the slide. These slides will be available later, but 78% of the women I interviewed over, a 2.5-3 year period of research did not recover from feeling silenced. They just, so what I'm trying to say is less than 25% of women in senior leadership who experience silencing, less than 25% actually recover. Meaning most of us who felt silenced are still sitting with it. We haven't healed from it yet. We opt out and we try to make job changes, but that does not bring voice recovery. When you self-silence, there's a much higher correlation to having physical ramifications. And voice recovery is not a switch. It takes time. Women equally silence other women. I mentioned that earlier. And sometimes that's more painful than anything we might experience from a man. 85% of the women I interviewed said they did have physical manifestations that they could really see accumulating during that time they've mostly felt silenced. And it's a virus. It really can impact every single one of your domains. In my original bout of research, I was asked about industries, like how is education different than technology, military, all those different things. So that's what led me back into it for a while, is could I tease out some nuances? And I wasn't able to tease out much, but what I was able to come to was that leaders in technology, women leaders in technology, had a higher percentage of opting out. and not recovering. Again, a very male dominant field. Um, the other thing that was so interesting to me, though, and I would love if any of you are thinking about being scholars or want to do a research project, I have a great one for you. Women in military were able to recover from silencing experiences until they got out of the military. They felt more silenced in private industry than they ever felt in military. Isn't that fascinating? So again, it's a small sample and I'd love to see more research, but there's something about that suggesting women on women, women on men, there's some dynamic happening in private industry that's making it really hard to lead. So those are some of the key findings, and I talk a lot about these in detail in the book, but I want to throw a question out here and just let you kind of sit with it for a little bit. What is your experience feeling silenced in either a professional or a leadership role? Just one exercise, if you would be willing, is it's called spontaneous writing. Pick up your pen, put your pen down on a piece of paper and just write. And let's just do it for like a good 60 seconds. I know that feels like a long time, but just write. What is my experience feeling silenced in a professional or leadership role? And I'll put my little watch on and I'll talk again in 60 seconds. Take another 5, 6 seconds. This is for you. You don't necessarily have to share, but I would love to see any thoughts you might have that you would put in chat. We're only going to take about another 10 minutes, and then I'm going to totally open it up for questions and answers and interaction. These are maybe thoughts or questions we've not sat in enough. Like, what do I wake up thinking about every morning? What's the pattern there? What's the quality of my voice? What's purposeful in my voice? What's my voice currency? What's my experience feeling silenced? Are you an upstander or are you a bystander? Meaning, are you watching people get silenced and not know what to do about it? How are we upstanding for other women? And this is where men in the room, gosh, I just love having male allies in the room, because some of the women in my research talked about what helped them heal was their colleagues who were men, who upstanded, who called on them, who saw them, watched them get silenced, watched women silence women, and did something. They didn't just witness it. So let's talk about some healing moves. And I'm just going to throw up one more slide here just to kind of give a sense of this. And I wish it was easy. I wish I could say, do these 2 things and everything will be good, because some of this is really hard work. When you're feeling silence, the first healing move you need to do is name it and get to the bottom of it. What happened? Who with? Was it a system? Or is this, I think I've always done this to myself. Start to explore that. And sometimes you have to do that in community. You know, it's one thing to get to the bottom of yourself individually, but for real change to occur, we have to declare what we're learning with others. And so sisterhood, colleagues, being seen, sharing your story with others is so essential. I have sort of outlawed this term self-care Because I guarantee you, when I say you guys need to have good self-care, I know what you're going to go to. Put the muffin down and exercise more. That's kind of what we think about with self-care, is eat better and exercise. Those are wonderful things to do, but sometimes you just need to eat the muffin and sit on the couch. Self-care is different than self-regard. As women, we need to have higher regard for ourselves. When we have regard for people, we listen to them, we follow them, we want to be with them, we are inspired them, we're influenced by them, and we need to have regard for self. And regard for self may result in good self-care practices, but we first have to get to the bottom of, how do I view myself? And then how do we start practicing using a valuable voice? As coaches, Kirsten and I are coaches, we practice with our clients. Tell me what you're going to say. Let me hear it. Work through it with me first before you get into that scenario in your workplace. Man, they stumble, and it's crunchy and it's rumbly and it's elbowy and it's awkward, and they need to practice. How are we practicing? Saying it in my head is probably not going to be enough. But not only practice it, but practice it in safe spaces. And then how do we give voice to others? How are we calling on those who are naturally not speaking up? It could be they just prefer to be more quiet. You know, this isn't about introversion, extroversion. It's about, you have ideas, we want to hear them. And how are we giving space for that? And then be patient, because it does take time to heal from these types of silencing experiences. And so one of the things I say to women who are experiencing this is, we've got to untangle it. What happened? What's going on? And how do I make sense of it? And what has my silencing experience resulted in? What have I lost? Have I lost health? Have I lost relationships? Have I lost positions? Have I lost promotions? What has happened? Or what do I believe has happened because of my silenced state? Back in the Obama administration, women came together and they banded together and they said, we want to amplify each other. And so they made a pact with each other that every time they were in a meeting and a woman spoke up with an idea, another woman in the group would say her name and repeat the idea, because they just wanted to amplify voices. There was an article written about this, and even Obama noticed it. Again, how are we saying each other's names and amplifying each other's ideas? So that's just one quick thing we can do. One more thing I want to point out that women are guilty of a lot. We've all watched it. It starts in middle school and somehow it gets carried forward. It's called the queen bee syndrome. I don't know if you guys have heard of this, but because we struggled so hard as women to get to middle management and then get to senior levels of leadership, or we worked really hard to get to that place as an educator or as a professional, and all the hoops we had to jump through and all the ways in which we had to be, dress, act to get to where we are. It's sometimes hard for us to watch women behind us doing it so easy. Somehow the path for them is smoother. And there's something in us that we never want to admit. There's something that we'd like to make it just a little hard for them too. They need to appreciate how hard it was to get there. That's the queen bee syndrome. We've got to take the sting out. We have got to broaden the highways for our female colleagues who are trying to get into senior level leaders. We should not have it be as hard for them as it was for us. And so there's this sense that women are harder on each other than they are with men when it comes to promotions. We're ruder. Women are ruder to each other. There's a study that's been done on civility. We tend to be less rude to male colleagues who are trying to promote, but we're harder with each other. And I don't know, I think it's unconscious, but it is something to be paying attention to. Are we upstanding? Are we bystanding? Are we witnessing? I guarantee all of you are someone's silencer. I am someone's silencer. We never mean to, but how are we paying attention to our way of being in the world so that we can create space for others to have voice and to be part of the conversation? And so I guess the reflective question, and I'll put this slide back up just as in close, and then I want to open it up for conversation. I've skipped through my slides pretty fast, but there's this sense of what now? So I've asked you to reflect on what you've experienced, but what have you encountered in your profession? And where is your opportunity as a professional to ensure everyone has a voice? What does that look like? Sometimes we can't give what we don't have. So if you are sitting in a silent state, really feeling suppressed and muffled, we got to get to the bottom of that first, because to give voice, we have to have some voice. And what I talk about, voice is a diamond. It is hard as rocks, can't break it, but a voice can pivot. That diamond, actually I do have a picture, let me just show you this. When we are really conscious of our voice, we're also conscious of our audience. We're conscious of who we are. And I like what Dr. Tina said this morning. She said, you've got to count the cost of your authenticity. Sometimes things need to be said, and there is a cost to doing that. We have to be very conscious of those costs, very aware. And I say sometimes too, we have to be fluent in the language that is spoken in our field, in our industry, in our company, in our work teams, in our departments. What is heard? Who gets heard? How is it heard? We have to be conscious of all of that. And then within that consciousness, I'm going to choose how I represent myself in that environment. Now, if I decide to acclimate and be part of the group so that I'm accepted, I want to do it with choice so that I can pivot back when I need to pivot back. And that diamond pivots. Sometimes I need to be really declarative and directive and unapologetic. Notice the next time you make a request, how many of you say, hey, can I ask you something? And I don't know if you guys can see me, but you scrunch your body when you make a request. Like, I'm going to make myself small before I offer up something with my words, which is, will you do something for me? What if we stopped doing that? What if we held our shoulders back and said, I have a request? And we're declarative in an unapologetic manner. Sometimes we need to be more story-centric in the way we speak, and sometimes we need to nip it down and get really bulleted in the way we speak to be purposeful and effective. There's a lot to think about when it comes to having voice. There's a lot to be processing of how clear am I on my purpose? How clear am I on my understanding of self? And how am I leveraging that in an organization? So much here. So let me pause here, and I'm gonna just see what questions you guys would like to invite into the room or comments. I know I've missed a lot in chat.
Yes, so this has been a very moving and evocative chat, Carrie, and I want to thank you for that, and some very powerful experiences shared and support and wisdom offered. Okay, so we've got someone who's ready to come on, and I just want to invite some others. Thank you.
You're up, Robin.
Hi, everybody. Before I get to my point, I just want to say that when I attended this conference last year, it was so empowering, and it like longitudinally carried me through the crazy time of last year. And this year I'm getting the same fulfillment. And I just want to thank you so much, because this is so powerful, and women are amazing. And to sit here and listen to all of you and listen to our struggles and listen to our celebrations, it's just amazing. And the power of women together there's nothing like it. But what I really want to say about silencing, me personally, as a personality, I'm a Taurus, stubborn yet friendly. So I'm not silenced, but what I have done in my life, because I am outspoken, and if I do silence somebody or find that I have silenced somebody, I know myself well enough to know that I can go to that person and say, I approached it this way. I'm sorry if I took your voice away or something such as that. What can I do to make this better? How can I empower you? And on the other side of that, for people that I notice that are being silenced, or if I'm in a meeting or a situation where a person is being treated a certain way, I will speak for that person. I will advocate for that person, and I'll be that voice. And I encourage all of you to do that as well, because we are leaders. And as women, we have a completely different set of hidden rules that we have to follow and navigate. And when we set boundaries, sometimes we're called a bitch because we set a boundary. And if setting boundaries and they're healthy and they're healthy for me and my students and my families, then I'm a bitch, and I'm okay with that. And I know that's not professional, but that's just that's kind of my analogy at this point. But I just want to say thank you. I love this conference, and I don't know. I hope it's empowering everybody as much as it's empowering me.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you, Robin. One method you could also employ in your meetings is at the end of every meeting, what didn't get said today? And just, that's it. And sit in the silence. A 2-minute sit is super healthy. If someone needs to say something, 2 minutes is enough time for them to speak it. So with little things, how are we creating space? What didn't get said today? Yeah. I was like, I don't know if Tina and I can be friends, because she says she doesn't like to swear, and I love to swear. And so I think swearing is just a beautiful form of human expression, and sometimes just no other word fits, but some really great expletive. But we are not bitches, we're not. No matter your boundaries, no matter your sign, no matter how you're wired, you are a human being, a beautiful human being. And when we, none of us. And I love, Robin, what you were saying, and I agree with you. But you know what? We can be declarative and assertive. We're not bitches when we do that. Yeah. Other thoughts or questions?
If someone even wants to come forward and just describe what their experiences were as they were listening, I think that would be very powerful too. So just want to invite that.
Kirsten, it's Katie. I had a question, not a comment, for Carrie. So I love the tangible give 2 minutes at the end of the meeting. What other tangible things can we take to the table with us?
So the amplification, the 2 minutes, they're harder. Like there's not fast ones. I mean, if you're working in a system that has historically marginalized, or is historically just, there's a sense of it, is maybe having some conversations specifically about what gets heard in an organization. Dr. Tina even mentioned that this morning. Like who gets heard? Who gets to speak? What is said in this organization that gets heard the most? So in healthcare, anytime you said Joint Commission, oh, everybody perked up, because that's regulatory, we have to pay attention. So, safety first tends to get, airtime, but who gets the airtime? What box on the piece of paper, the org chart, tends to carry the most currency? What makes that true? What would it look like if we started to have conversations around what gets heard in this organization and by who? Those are deeper conversations that take more time. But I think also going back to what was said earlier is having a norm that if you ever feel silenced, please tell someone. And men in the room, find ways to be an ally openly with words, not just silently, to be able to speak up, to say, I watched that interaction between the two of you. It made me uncomfortable. That's courage. That's upstanding, though. I don't know if I'm fully answering your question, but I hope that helps, Katie. Thank you for it.
That is helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
I got you, Beth.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay.
Yeah, hi, Beth.
Hi, I do have you talked earlier about how women tend to leave the situation or leave the job.
Yeah.
So are you suggesting that they stay, and how they do stay if they're being silenced or if afraid? to speak up?
Oh, Beth, that's such a great question. So there's a typology of women who feel silenced. There's the ones who stay and recover, the ones who stay and don't recover, the ones who leave and recover, and the ones who leave and don't recover. And the women who stay and don't recover stay because they feel like a calling. They've not been released from that calling yet, but they also suffer the most. And so in order to stay and recover, which is less than 25%, there's going to have to be some real active measures taken around self-regard, finding that community, finding your colleagues, unpacking why you feel silenced. It's harder work. But women can stay and recover, but it's not by accident, is what I would argue. It's with some intention. And those who stay and feel silenced throughout their career, there's just that low level of suffering where we're just not getting the full you, the full voice, the full sense of you. And that's what women, we have to come to terms with. Is my full self in this leadership role? Does that answer your question, Beth?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I see a couple more hands up. Troy and Vicky, I think.
Yes, I just need Vicky to start her.
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
Can you hear me?
I can. Hi.
Okay, sorry, I'm on two devices. I just wanted to say, thank you for your research and giving voice today to this kind of phenomenon. And I just wanted to say, as a person from a historically marginalized community and a doctoral candidate, and my research is on giving voice to marginalized communities, to our students and to our parents. And at the same time, having to realize and feeling that I didn't necessarily have a voice if I didn't have a title, if I didn't have a position, and if I didn't have a doctoral degree, then my voice may not be heard or validated. And just, I don't know, today having permission to say that I have voice regardless, that I think a lot of us as educators, we empower our students to have voice and we give to others. So it was just very rewarding today for someone to say and validate our voices as well, mine in particular, because I give that to others.
Yeah, thank you so much for your ongoing research. Gosh, there's so much more in this body of work that needs to be explored, especially with women of color and those historically marginalized communities. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Hi, Troy.
Hi.
I'm just interrupting here for just a minute to say we've got just about 3 minutes left. So just have that on people's radars.
Kirsten's telling me to make it quick. So, well, and I'm following Vicky, one of my superheroes. So thank you, Vicky. Thank you, Dr. Arnold. I was just thinking when the comment about bitches came up, that's one that's always kind of bothered me in a sense. Sometimes I know men that are rude. I've said rude things. Sometimes women say rude things. We all say rude things sometimes. And it's always bothered me that if a woman says something rude, we use the B word with her versus I would love for that word to go away altogether, because so you said something rude. Okay. How about I say, why don't you not be rude instead of why don't you not be a bitch? Right. And so that label has just always been weird in my mind and never been able to come to grips with that. So.
Yeah, I love every swear word in every language in every country except the B word. Yeah, that's one that and I can say this has been a bitch of a week or COVID has been such a bitch, and I think that's appropriate. I'm okay with it being used that way. But when we label women or men, I've heard it used both ways. It's getting to the core identity. I might have acted inappropriately and said something rude, but that doesn't mean I am. And so our doing and our doing and our being need to be separate. And I think silencing just blends it all together. We don't even know how to do because we can't figure out how to be anymore. And so thank you, Troy, for raising that, because I think when men stand up for women and say that's enough, no more of that, it does make a difference. We don't need to be rescued, but we love the partnership that we get from men when they notice it.
Thank you, everyone. And also just really thank you for the beauty of the chat. And Carrie, thank you so much for this. And I want to encourage everyone to get your book, to share your book. And it occurs to me that some voice recovery circles and some healing circles might be an appropriate part of the network that is forming. So just all of that. Carrie, do you have any just last word you want to say?
No, I just thank you. It is such a pleasure. I did put up my contact information here, and I believe this is being recorded as well. So again, it's about changing the conversation. And how do we change the conversation around our own voice and the voice of others? So thank you for letting me be here. I'm gonna definitely hang out and listen to the rest of the presentations. It's been a wonderful morning so far.
Thank you for being with us. And you're going to get lots of thanks in the chat. And I just want to reference that we are moving forward now into a beautiful